We are sense-making creatures. We devote enormous amounts of time trying to make sense of the world around us. And we do this subconsciously. This video explains what visual sense-making is and how to use visual sense-making to improve our thinking capacity and solve complex problems. Visual sense-making is the ability to understand the information we are faced with and how we process that information. We do this by synthesizing the data into a story using visual metaphors, patterns, and abductive reasoning. And then we make judgment calls based on what we understand. In this video, I refer to various terms like fast and slow thinking, complex adaptive systems, visual thinking, visual metaphors, and problem space. If you are unfamiliar with any of these terms, go to sensecatcher.com and explore these topics in more detail. I also recommend the post entitled 5 Fundamentals and Tips on How to Approach Visual Sense Making. Sense-making and making sense are at the heart of the human condition. It is how we perceive, play, work, imagine, learn, feel, and think. We are constantly looking for patterns to create order and get some sense of predictability so that we can act and make decisions. The visual sense-making process has 4 main interlinked aspects: visual thinking, storytelling, metaphors, and abductive reasoning as the overarching method. By using visual sense-making, we are taking full advantage of our visual cognition. We are able to sharpen our thinking, objectivity, and develop a smart, strategic, focused capacity. However, there is a paradox with our thinking. Instinctively, our thinking process has evolved primarily for our basic survival needs. It is a linear cause and effect process. It is what we refer to as the fast mode of thinking. The problem is, this type of thinking falls short when it comes to thinking about complex situations, especially in our fast-moving modern world. Having said that, the cognitive architecture of our brain is dynamic and adaptive. What this means is that we have the mental structures to deal with complexity. We refer to this as the slow mode. The problem with the slow mode is that it requires effort and energy, and our brain's default is to use the fast mode, which uses less energy. Our bodies have been designed to be ready for flight should we need to get out of danger quickly. In today's situation, we need to be able to regulate this contradiction. So, when we have to deal with problems that require rational thought in open-ended situations, the fast mode is useless. And for that reason, the slow mode needs to be activated. But for that to happen, we need a little help. We need smart tools that enhance and engage our critical thinking capacity. Okay, that was a short explanation of how visual sense-making sits with our cognition. Now, let us look at a very simple example to better understand the process itself. Before we do that, I must point out that the process is much more nuanced than what the example captures. Please keep that in mind. All right. If you look at the 6 images that you see on the screen, they represent fragments of information. The images are not clear, just like information is never straightforward. They are obscured with layers of stories, biases, culture, symbolism, and meaning, all embedded in the information. The question is, what is it that you are looking at? That is typically what happens when we are looking at a problem. The process of exploring what it is, that is the process of visual sense making and creating meaning. What you are doing is essentially trying to understand what those little black fragments are. At first, the information is nothing more than abstract squiggles. It is meaningless. The only way forward is to explore and disentangle and search for threads to tease out meaning through conversations, documents, and general research to better understand the situation you are trying to get to grips with. During the exploration process, you will unravel information that starts to provide glimpses and reveal the story of the situation. The story starts to emerge and starts to create a scaffold for meaning. In our example, this is represented symbolically by the G, the K, and the H as pieces of information. The moment you map the new information into context onto your map, your abductive reasoning process kicks in. Your visual cognition uses image-driven metaphors and patterns in quick cyclical iterations, producing hypotheses that propel you to explore and test further. In our example, the hypothesis appears to be the letters of the alphabet. This happens by looking at the various fragments represented by the little circles of our story. The fragments of information will typically range from being utterly obscure to less obscure, but individually, as standalone pieces of information, they are meaningless. However, it is only as a system acting together that we will allow the hypothesis to emerge and the story to unfold from the combined fragments of information. What you are doing is simultaneously looking at both the individual elements and the group of elements to try and tease out what the new story might be. This is visual sense making in action. As more information is gathered, we begin to get clarity either for the existing information or the new information, represented by the G, K, and H. While this is happening, we will automatically be assessing if both the hypothesis and the story are still making sense. Remember, this is not a sequential process. It is dynamic, fuzzy, and might even seem chaotic at times. The story emerges from the interaction of the elements, and the hypothesis either gains momentum in plausibility or not. However, if instead of the G you get a kettle out of the blue, your alphabet hypothesis will need to be replaced if the story is not making sense. It might just end up being a red herring or reveal a deeper and complex meaning of the situation. At this point, I need to underline and emphasize the importance of visual mapping. If we are not using visual thinking nor mapping, our capacity and hope to deal with complex situations is highly reduced. The slow mode of thinking does not get engaged. What will happen is that our cognitive limitations will shut down our slow mode, and the old way of thinking kicks in. We start to use our biases, judgments, linear cause and effect thinking, and we will only have the capacity to consider small chunks of information in isolation. In other words, we revert to the fast thinking mode. The fast mode is useless with complexity. It treats complex problems in a deterministic way, and we start to use formulaic and rule-based methods that cannot deal with dynamic change, uncertainty, and novelty. Any solution we develop from this way of thinking will create more problems. The only way to deal with complex problems is to tap into our slow mode, to activate and augment our visual sense-making capacity. To put it another way, when we solve complex problems, we are essentially trying to disentangle the elements within the context of the problem space. We need the ability to probe while having a map that allows us to see where we are and not get lost in the noise of the data, nor lose perspective. We must remain sensitive to subtleties and issues we are not aware of. We need to see both the forest and the trees. We need to weave the information we are discovering to create plausible explanations of the totality of the problem. This includes interactions, dynamics, and even the external forces impacting on the problem space. If we ignore any of these elements, we are failing. Abductive reasoning allows us to be agile. Any new data can change rapidly the trajectory of our thinking. This is only possible with visual sense-making in the slow mode, allowing us to be flexible and open to possibilities. In comparison, the fast mode is reactive and insensitive to things that we have not already come across, therefore useless when we are dealing with unknowns. Before I finish, there is one more concept that I think will help us to get a good understanding of visual sense-making, and that is entanglement. As we know, reality is highly entangled. There is no single root cause to anything. Everything is connected to something else. Remember the little circles in our example? Each circle is part of another system or story. Reality is highly interconnected. This is what makes a problem complex. Ignoring this simple principle is a major weakness in any attempt to solve complex problems. To illustrate the point, let us use two metaphors, clouds and clocks. The cloud is like a complex problem. It is constantly changing shape. We never fully know the forces shaping the cloud and how it is entangled with the rest of the atmosphere. All we can do is get glimpses and make sense of the issues and conditions that have caused the cloud to exist. On the other hand, if we look at simple or difficult problems, we know how they will behave. For example, sending a rocket to the moon. It is a difficult problem. Still, the problem can be quantified with very high degrees of certainty. The problem is not dynamic nor adaptive. It is not a complex adaptive system like clouds and complex problems. In summary, sense-making is not about getting it right or to get to the root cause or even to the bottom of the problem. The approach to deal with complex problems is to accept that it is a journey of exploration. There is no destination or endpoint. By making your thinking visible with SenseCatcher, not only can others get involved in your journey and thinking through visual maps, but you can also scrutinize your own logic. You can assess the connections, meanings, and explanations that are impossible to make if you do not use visual mapping. SenseCatcher acts as a dynamic scaffolding to help you solve problems. You will become comfortable dealing with chaotic and uncertain situations. You will stop being judgmental, and your mental attitude will be open and relaxed. Solving complex problems will become an enjoyable and rewarding process. I hope this has been helpful in explaining what visual sense-making is and addressing questions many people have been asking. Thanks for watching. Cheers.